And in this week's in-depth discussion, we take a closer look at the makeup of the Oklahoma Supreme Court. Who are the judges? What are their backgrounds? Who appointed them? And how do they tend to reach decisions? With more on that, here's Reese Wetzel and a panel of experienced court observers.
Thank you, Rich. And today we are breaking down the Oklahoma Supreme Court. And joining us to do that, we have Ben Felder, investigative reporter with the Oklahoman, and Andrew Spiropoulos, professor of constitutional law at Oklahoma City University School of Law. Thank you both for joining us.
You bet.
Thank you for having us.
Now, I just want to get into the Oklahoma Supreme Court here. We know they made some big decisions last week in regards to the abortion cases, but we want to learn more about who they are and who appointed them. Ben, I'm going to start with you here. How many people sit on the Oklahoma Supreme Court? Who are they and who appointed them?
Yeah, so there's 9 members of the state Supreme Court, and they are the Supreme Court is the court of last resort for civil matters. There's a separate court for criminal matters. They're appointed by the governor, although he or she would have some restrictions in who they can appoint. There's a body called the Judicial Nominating Commission. They're a 15-member group, half made up of attorneys, the other half are appointed by legislative leaders, and they present the governor when there's an opening on the court with a list of 3 names, and the governor is contained to select from just those 3 individuals put forward to him. Whoever he picks will fill the vacancy on the court. They will serve for a year, and then they will appear on the next general election ballot. It'll be a retention ballot, asking voters across the state just a simple yes or no on whether they should remain. If they do remain, and they always have been voted to remain, then they will serve a term of 6 years and then appear on another retention ballot after that time.
All right, and I just want to clarify here, the governor has no say in who those 3 that are picked are, right? Before they
Not directly, has no say on who those 3 individuals are, but can pick any one of those 3.
All right, well, Professor, I want to go to you here.
Sure.
We are talking about some big decisions that were made that kind of raise some questions about which way does this Supreme Court lean. In your eyes, where does this Oklahoma Supreme Court, is it a conservative court, more of a liberal court, or is it pretty much down the middle?
Well, these days it's a moderately conservative court. You have 4 members who are appointed by Democratic governors. You have 5 that are appointed by Republican governors, but 1 or 2 of the Republican justices have shown the tendency to occasionally join the Democrat appointed justices. So lately, the 3 appointees from Governor Stitt have closely stuck together. They sometimes can get 2 votes, sometimes they can't. So it really depends on the issue.
So is there a divide almost in the Supreme Court, or does it not look like that?
Oh, no, it's the same divide that you see in the rest of the country, in which you have, and by the way, this is not partisan in nature. In the 1930s, for example, the Republicans were the judicial activists, the Democrats believed in judicial restraint. This goes back and forth through American history. But we're in the period in which we're in right now, Democrats around the country, including in Oklahoma, right, tend to think that judges should have more freedom to make policy decisions, whereas the Republicans tend to think that judges shouldn't do that. That divide is reflected on the Oklahoma court, just as it is elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that divide is in the U.S. Supreme Court as well. After Roe v. Wade, we heard the same conversations that we've heard here with Oklahoma Supreme Court.
That's exactly right. And the various issues come up in the state as they do at the federal level and in other states as well.
All right, well, Ben, I kind of want to get your input here. How would you define the Oklahoma Supreme Court?
Well, I would agree with the professor on there. I think that's an accurate way to look at it. And, just looking at the math, it's a 5-4, Republican majority. But these are not, technically not lifelong appointments. They still have to survive a retention ballot. But there's not, they're not facing election every 2 years like lawmakers are. But yes, on the abortion question, I think a lot of people have maybe perceived this court to lean a little left. There have been 3 major abortion decisions since 2021 that the court has ruled to overturn the legislature's ban on abortions.
And Andrew, when we're talking about these decisions, are Oklahoma's once weighed in on this decision, or is it just constitutional law? Because we know that they cited those 2 bills that they revoked as unconstitutional.
Well, the court has no choice but to say that they're doing constitutional law because that's all they're authorized to do. And so they struck these bills down under the Constitution. Now, people disagree, of course, with the legitimacy and of their opinion, whether or not they got it right. There's great disagreement amongst Oklahomans and on the court itself, right, about whether or not the judges had the power to do what they did. But there's no doubt that, at least with regards to the abortion decisions, they were relying, the majority was relying on what it articulated as its interpretation of the Oklahoma Constitution.
Well, how do
and
they-
the dissents obviously disagreed.
Yeah, how do they come to their decisions? I mean, what is that process like?
Well, in general, the way that judges decide things, though, in Oklahoma, the U.S. Supreme Court, for example, has oral argument on every major decision on the merits. In Oklahoma, they're selective. They only do a few arguments every year on cases that they choose. So in most cases, what the judges do is they read the briefs from the parties, and then the judges then meet and talk about it sometimes, or sometimes they issue decisions by memo. But basically, each judge makes their own decision about how they, based on the arguments from the parties and how they want to decide the case. And then each judge submits their decisions, and when you get 2, 5 or more, right, and you have an opinion that 5 or more judges agree to, that's the decision in the case, if that happens.
All right. Well, Ben, some are calling for the governor to have more power in picking justices. What would that look like? What needs to happen?
Well, I think those people who are calling for that are looking to maybe model it more off of what you see at the U.S. Supreme Court level, where the governor, like the president, has the ability to select any name that they choose. Now, of course, at the U.S. Level, it has to be confirmed by the Senate. And so some people who are calling for that have said, there should be some kind of legislative approval process as well, whether that's the Senate or some kind of hybrid of the House and the Senate. But those critics right now of the current system say, hey, the governor only can choose from 3 names. And a lot of those critics will point to the Judicial Nominating Commission and say that, yes, half of it is made up of appointees of legislative leaders, but the other half are made up of attorneys from across the state. I'm not saying whether this is true or not, but some would say that, hey, if you take kind of a selection of attorneys from across the state, that body may tend to lean a little left. And so maybe you're not getting, maybe the governor doesn't have the chance to really select people that agree with his kind of ideological perspective. We did see a bill proposed last year that would ask Oklahomans in a state question to do away with the JNC and essentially model Oklahoma Supreme Court selection process after the U.S. level. The bill was, or the question wasn't put up to a vote. It didn't pass the legislature last year. I was kind of surprised we didn't see more chatter about it this year. We did see a bill that would create kind of a judicial review committee, trying to put a little bit more checks and balances, or at least publicizing the decisions in a little bit more, in a different way for voters to be aware. That bill passed the House, it died in the Senate. But after the recent abortion decisions, there's been some chatter amongst the legislature that maybe it's time to bring that back up, or bring up the question of doing away with the JNC. Some are calling for that in a special session this year, but that might be a little quick to get all their ducks in a row. But I expect this to be a pretty big conversation next legislative session.
And JNC, just to clarify, Judicial Nominating Committee. I want to kind of point this question to both of you. Do you envision more legislative movements coming through now that this has happened? I know that some lawmakers were very vocal about wanting to change this process. Do you see this happening anytime soon? Andrew, we'll start with you.
Well, I agree with Ben. I think it's going to be a big issue in the next session at the very least next year, because this has been pushed for quite a while now, 2 or 3 years. It hasn't gotten much traction in the House. The Senate has been more friendly to this idea of going to what the proponents call the Madisonian system, which is the U.S. Constitution system, and how to pick judges. We just have the governor as opposed to the president, and then have Senate confirmation. So I think that's what most conservatives want. The House has been the one that's been against it, but these abortion decisions put them in a very tough place because the House argument has been things are fine. Governor Stitt in the existing system has been able to get three nominees through, and they seem to be doing what the governor would expect them to do. Everything's just fine. It's going to be very difficult to make that argument in this session. So, as Ben described earlier, there are really 2 components to the existing system that conservatives really don't like. One of them is the Judicial Nominating Commission, because the bar has 6 members out of the 15, and so that gives them quite a big voice. But the most important component has been described, that conservatives really want changed. Because it has caused problems in other states. This movement is the fact that the governor cannot reject the slate of 3, right? Because it hasn't happened yet in Oklahoma. It has happened in other states.
Well, what's that selection process like when they're picking those 3?
It's in secret. That's part of the thing that people don't like about the JNC. The JNC meets confidentially. They interview the candidates, but it's a black box in terms of how it comes out. It's not like a Senate confirmation hearing where it's there and everybody to see on television, right? So that is one of the complaints, is that we don't know how those 3 people come out. and it cuts both ways, right? So far, the 3 people who have come out, right, have been the governor's had someone they really like out of those 3. How did that happen? We don't know. It's the black box, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't have to work that way, right? It could you could completely see a situation as it happened in other states, where those 3 people are completely unacceptable to the governor, and the governor has no choice. If the governor doesn't pick one of those, the chief justice picks one.
Oh, wow. So
after 60 days.
So there's no
Yeah.
re-election process,
Right.
no
So
reselection.
if you're a conservative, in the long term, that's the part of the process in particular you think has to be changed. Because the underlying problem here structurally, right, is that, and this is true throughout the country, it's also true in Oklahoma, is that if you're a conservative, right, the bar is always to the left, right, of the electorate in a state like Oklahoma. And so your concern is that the bar has power, has enough say over this process, you're going to get, you have the possibility of having judicial nominees who are to the left of the electorate. And it obviously causes some problems in terms of electoral legitimacy.
Yeah, well, Ben, we're talking about Oklahoma, but this is going on in other states as well. What are some other things that you've seen that might influence Oklahoma's decisions?
Yeah, I mean, Oklahoma is not unique in its system. The majority of states have some kind of nominating commission that presents names to the governor, and I think there's 10 states that have a fairly identical system to Oklahoma. But we have seen a lot more attention on Supreme Court nominees, particularly because of the abortion question. Earlier this year, the state of Wisconsin had a pretty high-profile election for a open seat on the court. Now, granted, that's a different system. You saw 2 candidates running. I believe technically they're supposed to be nonpartisan. Maybe they don't have an R or D next to their name on the ballot. But it turned into a pretty partisan race. And in Wisconsin, you saw the Democrat or the left-leaning candidate win in an election that was really geared towards around the conversation of reproductive rights. You don't have that same system here in Oklahoma. Like I said, you do have a retention ballot, but it's not as climatic when you don't have 2 candidates. You just have one that's on the ballot and voters being asked to keep them or not. And voters have never rejected a court justice on the retention ballot. But you are seeing a lot more attention. And I think the abortion question, because of what we've seen with the fall of Roe v. Wade, obviously it's always been a hot topic, but especially over the last couple of years, when you see the Oklahoma court reverse laws passed by the legislature, I think it has put more of a spotlight on the court. And also keep in mind, this is a governor that since day one has wanted more power for his office. I mean, he's not unique in that regard, but he has asked the legislature, and in a lot of ways they have complied, to give him more power of the appointment of agency leaders and commissions. And he sees this as handcuffs to his own power when it comes to selecting members of the court. And so, whether the legislature has the appetite or not next year to take on this issue, I think it's going to be one of the first things that the governor brings up in his State of the State address next year, of something he would like to see changed.
All right. Well, do you have anything you would like to add to that?
Yeah, I would. I think that's exactly right. I do think you have to keep in mind that a lot of conservatives, there's a debate among them here in Oklahoma. A lot of conservatives would prefer, and this has happened in other states, who've gotten rid of the Oklahoma type system, what's called the Missouri plan. They've moved to judicial elections, and there are quite a few conservatives here who would prefer that system.
What would that system look like?
It would be, as Ben just described with regard to Wisconsin. You could have nonpartisan elections or you could have partisan elections. You could do it either way. But I think there are a lot of people in the legal profession, both on the conservative as well as the progressive side, but on the conservative side, in terms of this internal debate, who don't want that at all, who think that actually that would be much worse. And so that's one of the things I think that might push the legislature towards the federal system, because that at the end of the day is a lot less scary than going to judicial elections, which can throw your state into an uproar, as we just saw in Wisconsin. So people need to forget that that's an option that may be, and the more the Oklahoma Supreme Court makes decisions that people object to, the more that's going to come up as an alternative.
So Oklahoma has a
That you can
divided
make.
court. It seems it's not. Yeah.
Right. There are many cases that are close, where people could make arguments on either side.
Alrighty. Well, we are running short on time here, so we are going to wrap things up. I would like to thank the both of you for joining us today. We have Ben Felder, investigative reporter with The Oklahoman, Andrew Spiropoulos, professor of constitutional law at Oklahoma City University School of Law, helping us break down the Oklahoma Supreme Court. I want to thank you both for your time.
Thank you very much.
All right.